Hello, Mark Struthers here from Musical Notes. I've just downloaded and installed a copy of Ample Sound's Ample Guitar M and had a quick play around to get the feel of it. And even though I've only been playing around with it for about 30 minutes, I do think that it's the sort of software that will eventually become an industry standard. Remember how Auto-Tune soon became the professional choice for fixing vocals? Well, in my opinion, Ample Guitar, with its many variants, will soon be the guitar emulation software that musicians and engineers reach for when they demand a sonically superb and totally convincing acoustic guitar, but without the need to record a real one, with all the time and consideration that takes. So you might not at the present time know Ample Sounds, however, it's only a matter of time before you do. Coincidentally, I'd actually been searching around for a substitute for other guitar virtual instruments that I own. And don't get me wrong, I do like the ones I already have. It's just that now I've started to use Ample Sound software, well, I'm fairly sure it's unlikely I'll want to use other software when Ample Guitar M, in this case, outclasses them. So, in the first of a series of tutorials, I'll start here by taking an overview of what is on offer. And in further tutorials, I'll get down to the nitty-gritty of editing and adapting the default sound so that Ample Guitar sonically sits in your mix with ease. Now, if you're anything like me, the first thing you'll want to do is hear what this sounds like. So I'll start by just playing a simple chord progression using a fingerpick style rather than a strum style. But because my simple chord progression of C, G, A minor and back to G with an E minor and an F major 7th thrown in, because I want this simple progression to sound much more like a classical player would play that progression rather than a rock musician, well, I can play this progression further up the neck to give it a much more interesting sound. Anyway, have a quick listen. Here we go. Okay, I'm sure you'll agree, a really convincing sound. And that's the beauty of the program. Providing you can find your way around a keyboard with some level of skill, then Ample Guitar will take what you play and create a great guitar accompaniment piece, as we've just heard. Right then, let's have a quick look around the interface. As you can see here, I'm using Ample Guitar M. All the multitude of samples that have been used to create this absolutely great software have been recorded, in this case using a Martin guitar. You'll notice there are other models. If you look at the Ample Sounds website, you'll find a Taylor guitar, for example. With this Martin guitar, in my opinion, it's a great emulation of the moodier and darker tone compared to a Taylor. Okay then, now you might notice up here where it says AG host, that this indicates that your version of Ample Guitar will run within the software sequencer of your choice. In my case it's Cubase, however it will run within all the other major DAWs. Now probably the first thing you'll want to do is set this up so that your Midi keyboard can drive it, and we do this by coming over to the Options button. Consequently, when we click on there, we now see this Select Audio Device dialog, where we not only set up the driver that we want to use. Now at present I'm running this on my laptop rather than any of these studio PCs, so I've only got these two options. You'll see the particular sound card driver for your system. Additionally, under Output, then you can set the speaker configuration, and you'll notice also there is a test button just to the right. If you click on that, then you can check whether in fact Ample Guitar is producing a sound through your system. Okay, so clicking on test there produced that sine wave tone. So, all's good with my system so far. The next step would be to move down here where it says Active MIDI Inputs, and you'll see a list of all the available keyboards that you've got connected. As I say, I'm running this on my laptop, so I've only got this one choice, this Keystation Mini 32. And by clicking in the radio button there, that now activates it. So from this point I can now play directly into Ample Guitar. I'll just close the dialog down. Now, one of the main things I like about this software is it's all on one page. We can access different views just simply by clicking any of these buttons here. At the moment we're on main, and therefore we see the illustration of the guitar predominantly taking up the top half of our screen. Just adjacent to it, we have a Strummer button. Now I'm not going to go through these with you just for the moment, we'll get back to this a little bit later on, but the Strummer section allows you to drive ample guitar simply by pressing a couple of notes on your keyboard, and that will generate an utterly convincing strum sound. In fact, a strummed pattern determined by the actual keys you press. So if you want an A minor, then you would press a certain key, or a G, you would press another key, etc., etc. Moving along, we've got an effects button, and this particular function allows us to integrate a number of different foot pedal emulations to our sound. Again, we'll get back to this. We have an about button that informs us about the company and the particular version number that you are running for your copy of Ample Guitar, and there's also an option within there that allows you to change the default location of all the different samples that you've loaded up as part of your original installation that makes this guitar utterly convincing. Moving along, we have a pair of buttons here, strum and finger, and I think their names there give you a good indication of what they do. Once more, we'll get back to this. And then finally, we see 4 buttons that produce a different recorded sound. We have 2 stereo sounds, indicating that a stereo pair of microphones were used. Or we've got 2 mono versions as well. And then in the main top half area, we have this illustration of the guitar. Now, as we've seen already, it isn't just an illustration. Once we start playing, it actually produces an animation of all the different notes that we are playing. Moving down to just below it, then this strip running across here horizontally, well, this contains many functions that you are going to use increasingly as you become more familiar with Ample Guitar, starting with this sequence of 6 buttons here that illuminate dependent on the actual type of sound that you are playing at that moment. Now, predominantly, I imagine when you start, you'll be playing the guitar notes so that they sustain, but you might want to mute them, or you might want to ring out some harmonics, so we'll get back to this again as we progress. And then moving to the right, you'll see some sliders and some dials. And we start off with a couple of microphone volume levels, so that we can relatively adjust the difference between microphone 1 and microphone 2, one being placed nearer to the neck and one being placed further down the body, so that you can create a tailored sound that suits your style better. There's also a main volume output, and then we see some dials, pan, width and double, which allow you to spread the performance more widely across the stereo landscape. Now, this is much more sophisticated than just using a simple doubling effect, a delay with any inherent phase issues that might cause. What this doubling effect does is provide you with the same notes, but produced by different samples. So you'll be able to spread the same note across the stereo width, but because different samples have been used, there will be that subtle variation in sound. And I've found already that this works very well when you want to recede the guitar just a little bit into the background, so that a vocal can be more prominent, for example.
Tuesday morning, gone 4 a.m. Watching the stars go out without you again.
Now, I feel I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, so I'll talk further about the other sliders and the dials as we progress in other tutorials. For the moment, let me just explain how this keyboard works underneath. You might notice as you move your mouse across the different keys that certain pop-ups appear over specific notes. Well, that's because when you are playing this live and you want to emulate a much more accurate sound by mixing up sustained notes with muted notes and additionally adding in some harmonics, then by holding down a particular note indicated by the pop-up, then you'll find you'll be able to produce a much more spectacular and realistic sound. You'll see also that certain notes held down allow you to create slide notes too. Now, in addition to those slide notes, you can also use your mod wheels down here. Rolling your mouse over these indicates what they actually do. Now, coming back up to our guitar illustration, you can either click on a note here, this low G note, for example, will play this note like this, or this E, or this C. And what I like about that is, when you play the note in isolation as we have just done, then you can also hear a subtle fret rattle or something like that after some of those notes to give it that much more authenticity. Of course, you can do exactly the same thing by coming down to the virtual keyboard, down here, clicking on the G again, plays this note. And of course, you can work your way up, playing any of these notes so that you can hear them in isolation. You could definitely hear the fret rattle after that G there. Now, of course, predominantly you won't be clicking on the keyboard or on the actual illustration of the guitar. You will be using your connected MIDI keyboard. So, of course, you play the chords that you want to, so that Ample Guitar reproduces that with this thoroughly convincing sound. Now, that's the actual finger style. If you wanted a slightly different sound, a more of a strum sound whilst finger picking as well, then click on Strum, and that will provide an initial strum whilst also playing the fingerpick notes. Don't get this confused with the actual Strummer button, the second one along over to the left there. Yes, they are related, but they are quite distinct in their operation. So for the moment, I'm going to go back to the finger style, and then I'll work my way back down to the keyboard because I want to point some things out to you. Just underneath the keyboard, you can see a very thin band, and this thin band takes on two colours at the moment. A sort of very dark orange, more towards a brown colour, and then a blue colour. Well, the blue colour indicates the range that you can play the notes. So playing any notes within this area will allow you to reproduce the notes on the guitar. Whereas over to the left here, this sort of orangey colour indicates which notes here can get used to create a specific function. This first one indicated as 0. Once that is pressed, then that allows our notes to sustain, as we've heard already. And therefore, if I play a couple of chords once more, then you'll be able to hear the notes ringing out. Here we go. Okay, so that's that very low C note. Selecting that means that any notes played between E1 and C5, and effectively that's that large blue range there, well, it now means, as we've just heard, all those notes will ring out. They will sustain. If I move up a semitone to C sharp here, if I click on here, then notes played within that pop-up range there will sound as a natural harmonic. Let me show you what I mean. Now, perhaps that F note wasn't the best example, but notice also that when you do select that key, that C sharp, to produce a natural harmonic, then in the technique section just above, the NH light illuminates to indicate that we are now hearing a natural harmonic, rather than a sustained note that we heard a few moments ago. Let me play another note. I'll come across to C this time, and as long as I've got this C note clicked, then that harmonic rings out. And of course, this NH light up here is illuminated. For me to be able to go back to the sustained option, don't click on the light, that won't have an effect. You have to come back down to the key, so clicking on C once more allows me to reintroduce these sustained notes. And when I do click on C, then as a consequence, the sustain light illuminates here, to confirm that's what we are going to hear. So effectively, that's what this range of notes does. As we've seen, if you roll over any of these notes, then you'll see a pop-up explaining what that particular note will activate. This D, for example, will now mean that the notes that we play will be a palm muted sound. And of course, its related light above illuminates to indicate this. So now if I simply click on a note and run up, well, as you heard, we had that palm muted sound, rather than the sustained notes ringing out that we heard a few moments ago. Now remember, to go back to those sustained notes, you have to come back down and click on C, which will mean if I run up the keyboard once more, well, as you heard, we now heard those notes ringing out, rather than them being muted. I'm going to finish up here then, just for this opening tutorial, now that we've seen the user interface and have explained where things are and how we can use those key switches to vacillate between different playing styles and their related sound. Okay, now as I say, I can't recommend this software enough. I've only been playing around with it for about half an hour, and in fact, probably about an hour now, seeing as I've just been walking through it with you. And within this hour, I've fallen in love with it already. So I'm going to leave you here for the moment, and I'll see you soon in another tutorial when I get into the details a little bit more.